I'm Corbett Wall with USDA Livestock and Grain Market News, here with your weekly market summary for the week ending February the 22nd, where feeder cattle and calves of most all sizes and weights sold unevenly steady, pretty much in a range between $3 lower and $3 higher for the most part. Receipts were quite a bit lighter. Early on in the week, it was mostly because we had such a sharply lower market last week and made a lot of your sellers just pull back and decide not to market this week. But then later on in the week, from midpoint on, it was because of the big snowstorm that come through the midsection of the United States there. But in your early week sales, we did see some support, especially for 600 to 800 pound cattle, and more so if they had the kind of condition to where they could perform quite well, whether they were going into a feedlot, a growing yard, or maybe being turned out on pasture of some time and maybe not turned out till later. But predominantly on those 6 and 7 weight cattle is where you saw that. Your lighter weight stocker cattle, very uneven there, and it just depended on what your grazing conditions are going to be in that local area, whether you had any moisture or not. Towards midweek, it was whether those cattle looked like they could take a storm or not. And but pretty much in those states where we do order a lot of calves and go west with them, right along that Delta region, most of those places were quite a bit higher on lighter weight calves. And when you get a little further north into Kentucky and Tennessee and places like that, not so much. They were weaker there. But right along the Delta region, we did see higher lightweight calves on order. But then your big feeders weighing over 800 pounds, and especially over 900 pounds, not much market support there, maybe steady at best, but just not too many friends on those cattle right there. There's not going to be any way to put any cheap gain on those cattle, and those cattle are real closely tied to your futures market, which was really tough most of the week and lower, especially at midweek like Wednesday there, just sharply lower. But right here, the last this week, of course last week was sharply lower, not so much this week, but we really haven't found which way we're going to go from here right now. Nobody seems to be really happy, the buyers or the sellers, either one. Pretty much melancholy there. The only person that might be happy with what's been going on the last couple of weeks is somebody that sold a lot of cattle 2 weeks ago and then forgot to lift their hedges. But that's not going to happen in too many instances there. But the big snowstorm that come across, it started out like on Wednesday down in the Texas Panhandle area there, and we had measurements of snowfall up to a foot or more in places like near Delhart, Texas, like down in the Texas Panhandle, through the Oklahoma Panhandle and Oklahoma, and throughout Kansas, especially central Kansas, into Missouri, Nebraska, and Iowa. Just a big widespread snowstorm across there. Nobody's really complaining that much because it is moisture of some form, and take all that we can get, especially in that Kansas area. It's probably not going to give them much runoff, but it will give them some moisture and maybe kickstart that grass here within the next 6 weeks or so. But just a huge snowstorm, and the buyers really pulled out of the market there. By Wednesday afternoon, your buyers didn't want any cattle. And if they could get those cattle bought Wednesday morning in an auction and get them on a truck headed to where they needed to go, it wasn't so bad. But a lot of Thursday sales were canceled. Pratt was canceled, Salina, Kansas was canceled, up Valentine, Nebraska was canceled. Some of those markets are going to try to sell those cattle later on, maybe this weekend or early next week, and still have another sale next week. But it just pretty much halted everything, and the big snowstorm adversely affected all 5 major feeding areas. So it was a big storm. But your fat cattle, they had a few early week sales, mostly in the Texas Panhandle at 123, which was steady. But then late in the week in the northern areas, we had some 198, which was $2 higher because of that snowstorm. And most of the time when you have a big snowstorm, it does help the market just a little bit as far as fed cattle being bought by the packers, and some of the guys were turning down 198 late on Friday there. So maybe we do have a little pep, and the board was better late Friday, so we may have a little pep in next week's action. The cattle on feed report come out on Friday. The analysts absolutely notched the on-feed numbers at 93.8% of a year ago, which is a lot less cattle on feed 1st of February than what there was a year ago. Your placements come in slightly higher at 101.6 compared to 100.3, which was the average guess, which that's a little bit bearish, but then it's mostly covered up by the marketings, which were slightly higher also at 105.6. They said there's no beef demand, but our marketings in January were 105.6 at the same time a year ago compared to the guess, which was 104.7. Regional weighted averages this week in the north central states: 8 to 900 pound steer cost you $134.02 compared to $134.81 last week and $150.92 a year ago. Down the south central states, 7 to 800 pound steer cost you $138.80 compared to $138.68 last week and $156.60 a year ago. And down in the southeast, we've got a 5 to 600 pound steer costing $154.33 compared to $154.45 last week and $175.94 a year ago. We're getting a long ways off of those record highs we posted about this time last year. That wraps up your feeder summary for this week. Check out our website for more market information at marketnews.usda.gov. From the Regional Market News Office in St. Joe, Missouri, we'll talk to you next week.